One of the largest reasons that Ukraine's counteroffensive has been so slow to make progress is that Russia's defense is very well prepared. And an essential part of Russian defensive doctrine is mining.
Mine.
That's right. And we are going to break down in this video just what mines Russia is using, how they are innovating in ways on the battlefield that no one could have expected, and what we can expect Ukraine to try to do to stop it. I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's get right into it. Assuming I can adjust my camera. Okay. Now, here's what I want to talk about. First off, we are going to talk about the types of mines being used in this conflict, right? And thankfully, Human Rights Watch is out here looking out for us and recognizing some of the mines that are being used in this conflict. So let's talk about it. First off, what is a landmine? A landmine is just a passive weapon, okay? It is used to... According to the U.S. Army, a landmine is an explosive device that's designed to destroy or damage equipment or personnel. Explosive equipment targets include ground vehicles, boats, and aircraft. A mine is detonated by the action of its target, the passage of time, or by controlled means. There are two types of land-based mines, AT and AP, anti-tank and anti-personnel. Mines generally consist of the following parts. There's always going to be a fire mechanism, a detonator, a booster charge, and the main charge, as well as a casing. They're very simple devices. As we've seen in Iraq and Afghanistan, the IED, the improvised explosive device, doctrinally is just a mine. It is activated by the actions of its target or the passage of time or controlled and detonated. And they meet all of these characteristics. Even a 155 shell attached to some command wire is going to have a firing mechanism, casing, main charge, booster charge, and a detonator. So these are cheap, easy, simple weapons that have tremendous battlefield effect in modern warfare. And why is that? Well, the short answer is that mobile warfare, right? Maneuver warfare depends on, well, mobility. And the fact is that mines are effective not just because they can destroy vehicles or damage, wound or KIA personnel, but more significantly, they are what the U.S. Army calls an obstacle. Now, an obstacle is going to be anything that impedes the movement of a military force, right? So let's see if we can find the definition here. According to the Army's FM 9-90-7, obstacles are any characteristics of the terrain that impede mobility of force. Some of them can be as simple as obstacles like mountains, rivers, and railway embankments. But you can also have emplaced obstacles, which are characteristics created by the enemy that still impede mobility of force. And when we talk about using mines as obstacles, well, the reason they're so effective is pretty straightforward. Let's take a look at a combat map here, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. So here is a Ukraine combat map. Now, as you guys can see, one of the chief areas where Ukraine has been fighting and trying to seize territory has been along this river here near Staromayorsk. Now, when we zoom in, we can see the actual terrain of Staromayorsk has really for Ukraine only two approaches that they control, here and here. But if you have a tank, you may have the ability to go in any of these areas, meaning that if you're Russia trying to mount a defense, you have to prepare to defend from just about any direction, unless you can create an obstacle. And so by using mines, you can block off large areas of especially open terrain where your forces may not have to maneuver, but the enemies may. So if you're defending Staromayorsk, you can mine these fields here and these fields, knowing that your personnel aren't going to need to go out from defensive positions, but Ukraine is going to have to come in. And Ukraine will quickly learn that they shouldn't be in these open fields. And what you're going to do is create an effect called canalization. This is where you force the enemy to go down a narrowly prescribed route. You use the mines to direct people to where there isn't mining taking place. And by doing that, you make the defense a lot easier. Suddenly, if you have 200 people in Staromayorsk, you don't need to worry about this area or this area or this area. You need to worry about about 6-meter wide approaches where the enemy can potentially come from. And suddenly, your defense gets a lot easier. You have your artillery sit right here, and you pre-sight your targets. You say, you don't need to know. We'll tell you exactly where. This intersection, we already know the grid. So instead of having to give a new fire mission, the artillery pieces are already ready to put rounds right on target. Similarly, troops can set up ambush sites where they know there's no chance that their Ukrainian forces are going to arrive from the side or from behind because there's too many mines. So instead, they'll set up designated ambush sites simply awaiting the arrival of the enemy who's been effectively canalized. And so while I don't know for sure where Russia has emplaced mines here, I can tell you from some of the combat footage I've reviewed, it seems like Russian mines are absolutely a highly effective tool in blunting the Ukrainian counteroffensive. If you want to see my breakdown of some of these videos, they're actually going to be on combatvetnews.com. YouTube's terms of service have really cracked down on any war content, so I've moved a lot of it to Combat Vet News. If you want to support what I do, keep me independent, keep me able to do this, any one of these tiers is going to get you access to the exclusive room on the Discord and the members-only content where I break down the battlefield footage that gives us the real insight into what's going on. So check out the link in the description. It should be up there, and it's in the pinned comment. Okay, now let's talk about exactly what sort of mines Russia's been employing in this war. And for that, we have Human Rights Watch, who actually does pretty good research. Now, there's a lot of treaties about the use of mines because remember, a mine is dumb. It's a mechanical device. It doesn't distinguish between an attacker and a civilian. It doesn't even distinguish between friend and foe. So it can be very hard, especially in conflict zones, for civilians who then who may or may not know that there's mines around, may or may not have a method of clearing the mines. It can be very tough. So there's two categories, as we talked about, anti-personnel, anti-vehicle. You could see almost all of the mines employed by Russia are either Soviet-era mines or Russian upgrades of Soviet-era mines. So when we talk about type, this is how they actually damage personnel or equipment. Fragmentation is simple. It means it creates a lot of little fragments that will harm usually a person. Blast means it relies on a powerful concussive blast to actually create that wall of kinetic energy that's going to damage internal organs, brains, that sort of thing. The final areas are shaped charges. Shaped charges is a term for instead of creating many little fragments that expand outward, a shaped charge channels the energy of the explosive into a single fragment, and that one fragment becomes very hot and becomes very sharp as it's pushed through the air. So what you create is a spear capable of slicing through armor, especially when combined with certain types of timing devices. So how do you set off a mine? Well, there's tripwire and command, right? One of the most simple and rudimentary, where either a soldier has to physically watch and set off the mine, or they install a tripwire, a literal piece of wire that activates the mine that's used near. That's usually emplaced near the mine. It runs from the mine to another fixed location and waits for someone to pass through it. You also have pressure plate mines where they wait for someone. This is the classic mine where someone steps on the mine itself, and the pressure of them pushing it or touching it activates the mine, setting it off. You also have, of course, self-destruct mines. These are mines that oftentimes comply with modern mine treaties that require that mines not be persistent to long after a conflict. And so often these mines will have an automatic detonator that will cause them to self-destruct after 30 days or weeks. And that is to ensure that after the war ends, 2 years later, you're not having kids playing in a field running into mines. Now, you have a couple other types of initiation. You have seismic. Seismic literally is when the mine is so sensitive, it detects vibrations in the ground near the mine. So you're not required to touch it. You just simply need to get close enough to disturb the ground, and that will activate the mine. You also have combinations. You also have mines that use magnetic influence. This is just detecting steel. That's all it is. It detects a powerful magnetic attractant. So again, steel or iron, and that will activate the mine. It's very effective as an anti-vehicle measure. So having broke this down, what are some of these mines look like? Well, as you can see, here's an example of 2 PMV4 anti-personnel mines. You can see them buried under the pavement or concrete here. And you can see it looks like just a fallen tree and some disturbed dirt and concrete. But in fact, it was concealing an anti-personnel mine, a PMN4. And a PMN4, right, we know would be activated by pressure, right? So it was just waiting for someone to come and clear this obstacle. Maybe a convoy, someone gets out of the convoy, tries to clear this debris, runs into a pressure mine. You also have, of course, other types of anti-personnel mines. Many of these pictures here depict mines that have failed to activate or been disassembled, but you can see how oftentimes these actually are not that sophisticated. These are simply weighted, they land on an area. POM2s are activated by tripwires or self-destruction. So they land and they can oftentimes deploy a tripwire that's just waiting for someone to trigger it. You also, of course, have these very small anti-personnel mines that land in the ground and just, again, await someone nearby, that seismic sensor, to pop them off. But here's what's interesting, is that how do these mines get in place? Well, you can literally have soldiers go out, dig holes, and stick mines in them. It's true. It is a way to do it. But it is a far cry from the truly effective way to deploy a mine. And I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the more common ways that you're seeing mines deployed now. So mines can be emplaced deliberately by light infantry personnel, right? Literally dig a hole, lay them in there, but they can also be scattered. Scatterable mines refer to a class of mine that isn't deployed to the battlefield by hand. Instead, it's deployed often using munition delivery systems. Classically, in Volodar, the Ukrainians actually used a British system that launched a rocket, it exploded over the battlefield, and down went a cluster of mines that then sat and waited, denying the area to Russian armored forces. And Russia, of course, has mines that can be scattered from helicopters, scatterable mines from missile systems. There's a wide variety of ways to deploy mines without having to go through the tedious work of having soldiers and individual units go out and actually emplace mines themselves. And the result can be huge areas become denied to your enemy forces. Now, here's some of the ways that, again, mines can be used to achieve battlefield effects. First is disrupting them. The U.S. Army reports that it causes the enemy to break up its formation and tempo, interrupt its timetable, commit its reduction assets prematurely, and piecemeal the enemy attack, literally causing a force to shatter or go around the minefield. You can turn the enemy, as we talked about. They're going to advance straight on, but instead now they have to turn and go to another direction, canalizing them. You can fix the enemy. Oftentimes when the enemy is trying to move quickly through an area, they suddenly have to slow down and clear a minefield. So you can deploy a minefield just expressly so that the enemy has to stop and clear it. Or, of course, you can block your enemy. You can literally just create a space where the enemy just simply cannot go. And so now that we know how Russia intends to deploy its mine, or has deployed its mines to achieve tactical effects, how can Ukraine clear them? Well, NATO doctrine has a process, right? And it's referred to as breaching. Breaching operations just means that combined arms work together under a single commander to successfully overcome obstacles. Now, wherever possible, According to the doctrine, minefields need to be bypassed to maintain momentum and conserve critical counter-mobility assets. What this means is, of course, you don't want to be slowed down by a minefield. NATO doctrine, as we talked about, favors maneuver. It favors power. And so slowing yourself down to work through a minefield is really hard. But you have to be aware that this bypass could give the enemy exactly what they want. You could be turned, you could be disrupted, you could be channelized into an ambush. So bypassing is preferred, or if aviation assets are available, you can just hop right over the minefield. Good luck getting that done on this battlefield. So what do you do when you encounter a minefield? Well, you've got to rely on some fundamentals called SOSUR. SOSUR is how we breach every obstacle, and it's a series of principles. The first is suppression. That means, in this case, that Ukrainian forces have to stop Russian forces from being able to deliver fires onto that force that's trying to breach the minefield. And these fires are highly effective, so it relies on counter battery, it relies on good intel. You also have to suppress the enemy positions if they're waiting in ambush or are even overwatching the minefield just to make sure no one tries to clear it. And so this suppression right requires a considerable amount of firepower to engage the enemy. Next, you have to engage in obscuration. This stops the enemy from observing and acquiring targets. This can be done through smoke. Again, it's a little tougher when you're talking about dozens of kilometers. But smoke can be a really effective way to obscure the enemy's vision of specific portions of the battlefield. Then you have to secure, which is securing the breaching site, and then reducing. Now, reducing is a specific doctrinal term that means creating lanes through or over an obstacle to allow passage of the attacking force. Now, I want to point out that clearing a minefield and reducing a minefield are very different things. See, if you're a farmer and you want to plant your crops, you need to clear every mine out of that minefield. But that's not the only tool available to military commanders. In fact, clearing mines out of areas is kind of a waste of time. All you need to do is mark where the mines are and ensure you have a method to allow you to pass through them. And so most often, this involves what we call reducing mines. This is carving out a small channel through a minefield, marking it properly, ensuring that your forces can move past through this minefield without too much disruption to your combat operations. Minefield reduction is really, really hard. This is literally doing the bare minimum. So as you can see, right, there's a whole bunch of ways to clear things. But remember, if you are conducting something called a 1 meter assault footpath to allow dismounted troops so that they can continue attack or secure the far side of a minefield, you're going to need about 1 meter. An initial lane will allow the passage of assault forces, so Bradleys, tanks. That needs almost 5 meters. Intermediate lane is simply a better marked initial lane, and then a full lane is 10 meters wide, allowing traffic to move forward and back through the minefield. But when we're clearing, that's something that happens long after. Instead, we want to talk about the reducing a minefield. There's a couple ways. First, you need to detect the minefield, right? If you don't know it's there, you are going to end up in trouble. Now, you can do so through seeing the mines. That's the best way. The next best way is physically trying to detect the mines. Like literally a soldier squats down and looks, listens, and feels for mines. If you think this sounds tedious and extremely dangerous, you are correct. The U.S. recommends that you make a soldier do this for no more than 30 minutes in combat because it is unbelievably stressful. As you can see from this diagram, it's measured in inches. Like you clear an inch at a time. So you see how just hard this can be. Then you have to dig the mines out. This is the worst method, the second worst method. The worst method of detecting a mine is running into the mine. The second worst is making a soldier clear every inch with a little piece of plastic. Now, let's talk about things that actually kind of work. You have a mine detector. This is something that detects the metallic signatures present in basically every mine that's been detected, that's been designed. And it, again, can be very dangerous because you have to walk and sweep back and forth, just like a metal detector on the beach, only you can't miss anything ever. Plus, you run into other issues. For example, it may not detect, say, a tripwire that's rigged to a mine 15 meters away. So you can still set off, say, fishing line tripwire, set off a metal mine 15 meters away, and even holding a mine detector in your hands, you may still run into you may still trigger a mine, right? 20 to 30 minutes. Again, the maximum amount of time an individual can use the detector safely. Next, you have things like airborne mine standoff detection systems. These are basically advanced types of radar that looks at thermal and other anomalies along suspected minefields to try to tag broad areas that might be mined. You also, of course, have mine detectors in vehicles, and as you can see, these are vehicles notorious for detecting mines the hard way. They are meant to drive over the mines. They can safely take explosives from the mines, and it can be an effective way to detonate or detect mines in an area. But the problem is you can only really hit one AT mine with these things. And so when we talk about how, of course, the best ways are probably things like the MICLIC. This is a mine clearing line charge where basically you're going to take out the mines by using explosives against them. That's right. It shoots out a nice big wire of explosive. It lands in a 100-meter area, and then it detonates, destroying or disabling any mines in the vicinity, right? You're probably going to want to do another sweep as you pass through, but the problem is this is a very complex, very expensive system, and it will give you a 14 by 100 meter path. So if you're talking about using a MICLIC every time you want to advance through extensive Russian minefields, you are looking at a lot of MICLIC deployments. 100 meters at a time is tedious. But there's not really much of a better way other than knowing where the mines are. As you can see, employing these MICLICs is an art form in and of to itself. And again, if you're talking about clearing kilometers and kilometers of minefields, the MICLIC is going to really be it's a hard tool to rely on. You, of course, have a bunch of other things, a bunch of other weird, sort of not terribly effective tools that can reduce minefields, such as an APOBS. This is an anti-personnel obstacle breaching system, basically a way to cut through AP mines and wire entanglements. Think of it as a baby-sized MICLIC, right? You also, of course, have the Bangalore torpedo, again, a sort of weird ground MICLIC. But you guys are seeing there's even mine clearing blades. The truth is none of these are very effective. You can sometimes mount them again to a tank to push these mines to the side, setting them off, but you need so much armor. This can be really effective against anti-personnel mines, but it can be really slow against anti-tank mines and not really all that effective simply because of the vast size of anti-tank mines. So all this to say, it is a really, really hard problem that the Ukrainian forces are faced with in dealing with these mines. And there isn't really a good solution to mass clear mines of this nature, especially when you have to do so under fire from Russian indirect artillery, from Russian air assets. This is a tough, tough position to be in. And I think it's one of the largest reasons why not just we're seeing Ukraine struggle in its counteroffensive, it's one of the reasons why Russia struggled in its counteroffensive, especially in places like Volodar. And mines are the number one weapon used against U.S. forces in Iraq and Afghanistan. They were the most effective by an order of magnitude. So the lesson is clear. Unfortunately, until we find a way to disable mines en masse or to render them inert or reduce minefields very quickly, mines are going to be a core component of the battlefields of the next couple decades. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for joining me, and I will see you guys in the next one.